Hi everyone, this is the Do3 podcast. This is for anyone who loves swimming, cycling or running, or of course, likes to do all three. My name is Dave Knight and I'm a professional triathlon coach based in the UK. Along with my excellent co-coaches, who you'll get to know along the way, we spend our daily lives helping those who love to swim, bike and run. We want this podcast to inspire you, motivate you, make you laugh and cry, have fun and learn a thing or two. We want to help you get the most out of the sports that you love. I'm glad you found us and we hope you stick around. Welcome to the Do3 podcast. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 6 of the Do3 podcast. So last week we spoke to Paul Newsome, who's the head coach and founder of Swim Smooth. If you haven't listened to that, then listen back because it's really interesting. He talks about how to get the most out of your swimming and also talks to us a little bit about his kind of coaching journey and the path that he's taken to become where he is and who he is today. So really worth a listen to. So go back to that's episode 5 there. So this week we are speaking to Rich Hawkins, who's an age grouper, so he's an amateur athlete. He's based fairly locally to us, and he is a long-term bodybuilder, so he's done bodybuilding pretty much his whole life, and he talks about his journey from becoming a bodybuilder to hopefully becoming an Ironman. So talks about the ups and downs that go along with that journey, and really, really interesting stuff. So if you're on a similar journey or you're thinking about that, then really have a listen to it because I think you'll find it interesting and useful. So without further ado, let's speak to Rich. Thanks for coming.
No problem. Absolute pleasure.
So I wanted to speak to you as an athlete that I coach. Yep. You're obviously a normal person, as in you're not... You might consider yourself to be elite, Rich, but you're not an elite or professional athlete. So you're a normal kind of what we'd call age grouper in the triathlon world. And you're on a bit of a journey at the moment, aren't you, with your
very much so
your triathlons?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you want to kind of give us a bit of information about where you're coming from and where you're trying to get to?
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm coming from sort of the bodybuilding and weightlifting space more so than triathlon. And if I'm being really honest, if you'd have asked me 18 months ago, would I be cycling around in Lycra doing triathlons, I would have probably laughed at you, to be honest. It was never something that I set out to do or had a goal to do specifically. But I've gone down this path and got the bug and been bitten by it. So, for me, it started off with my wife felt pregnant and we've been trying for a long time. And I started thinking, I'm quite old to be a dad. And I'm not, but I was 36. I'm quite old to be a dad. I wanted to be a dad in my 20s. And all right, I'm quite big and I'm quite strong, but I run down the stairs and I'm out of breath. So I thought I'd go and do a bit of running, get a bit fitter. From there, within a couple of months, was like, maybe I'll enter a marathon. Did that, and it's kind of just snowballed from there. And I started looking at kind of other sort of hybrid athletes or bodybuilders and weightlifters that had gone down that kind of journey. And stumbled across quite a few. And I remember watching a video that said, exact words were, welcome to the Ironman, the hardest single day fitness challenge on the planet.
Yeah.
And I thought, what is that then? What is an Ironman? What are the distances? And I remember reading the distances and thinking, that's inhuman. Like, how is that possible? And I just couldn't get my head around how it would be possible to do all of that and it scared me. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something that it genuinely scared me. Which was the reason why I thought, well, that seems a good idea to, yeah.
Okay.
And then I had the kind of itch was there in the back of my mind. I do quite a lot of sports massage, and I was speaking to my sports masseuse, and she mentioned that there was somewhere doing open water swimming at Compton Verney, and that would be a good place to start. So I looked that up and then found you and thought, well, actually, there's potentially a coach on my doorstep. And we started having the conversation. And I remember saying to you, do you think it's doable? And you said, yeah. And that was enough for me, really.
Okay. So you're going from somebody who's got a background of weightlifting and bodybuilding to Ironman. When did we start? I'm rubbish with dates.
I think it was August last year.
So it'd be just over, by the time you get to, because you're doing Ironman Barcelona, aren't you?
Yeah.
So by the time you get to Ironman Barcelona, which is in October, So it'll be 14 months. To go from 0 to Ironman in 14 months is the plan, isn't it?
Basically, yeah. I mean, to be fair, we were still training for the marathon then, which was September. So it's probably about 12 months from sort of doing no triathlon to Ironman in 12 months, yeah.
You on track?
I think so. The only problem is this damn knee injury at the moment that's holding back my running.
Yeah.
Cycling's going really well. And I have these theories that I don't know how many of them are backed up by science, but observations that I make. And I do think that a lot of the things you do when you're younger, we've had this conversation about swimming. Like people who swim a lot younger, they kind of grow the right movements and the muscle patterns. And for me, like I spent my whole childhood on a bike. I mean, I used to build bikes, to work in cycle shops. It was a massive thing to me. And cycling seems to have come quite naturally, more naturally than certainly swimming, which is a massive challenge for me. And even running, although running I really enjoy, I still think cycling has come more naturally to me. But yeah, I think we're on track. I mean, I'll get through it on stubbornness alone, if nothing else. But I would like to set a decent time. I would like to kind of go down this path and go down this route a bit further and a bit deeper. It's just obviously this knee injury at the moment is holding me back a little bit. Yeah,
I mean, again, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you is because I think people will be able to connect with you because you're a complete, like literally a complete novice in the sport, weren't you?
Yep, massive.
No bike.
Didn't own a bike.
No kit, no wetsuit, none of that, but doing an Ironman.
Yeah.
And coming from completely different sport. And I think that's why I want to talk to you, because I think people will find it interesting about the kind of the journey that you're on from where you're coming from to where you want to end up at, raising your hands in the finishing line at Ironman Barcelona, which is what's going to happen. So in terms of your kind of sporting background, obviously you've done bodybuilding and weightlifting and that kind of thing in the past.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's your main kind of background.
Mainly, yeah. I mean, I did martial arts as a kid, and I did martial arts again in my sort of early 20s. I actually worked as a doorman for quite a long time, for about 7 years, so I did quite a lot of martial arts there as well.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, never really, even from a bodybuilding perspective, never really had the itch to compete. And I think this is what I quite like about triathlon, although there's going to be, the elite guys and the guys that are a bit more competitive that are against opponents. It feels very me versus me.
Yeah.
It feels very much like the challenge is on myself. And I think that's the bit that I'm kind of falling in love with, because it's that constant challenge of, it becomes a lifestyle. It becomes so much of your life. Like, I need to go swimming again for the third time, or I need to cycle again for the third time. And it's kind of that overcoming that mental challenge of the days that you think, yeah, I don't really fancy it today. It's raining, it's cold, I could just stay at home. And overcoming that, to me, is really powerful. And not just within sport, but within life in general. To be able to overcome those times that you don't feel like it and you have the discipline to do it, I think is really quite key to a successful life.
But in terms of your bodybuilding in the past,
yeah,
presumably, well, you will have committed to doing that regularly, and you'll have the same kind of, well, there'll be similarities there in terms of how professionally you want to take it, in terms of the regularity and the way you watch your nutrition, that kind of thing. So you're used to that kind of background.
Definitely, yeah, and yeah, being kind of strict. Training's always been a huge part of my life. I've never been a drinker, even when I was younger, because I actually started training very young, because I think I've mentioned to you before, as I grew up, we lived in a ground floor flat, and the relevance of that was the floors were solid concrete, and my dad's bedroom was literally a bed in the corner. There was a bookshelf with a load of bodybuilding magazines, some really old school cast iron weight plates, and like a weight bench that looked like it had come out of the 60s. And that was it. That was all he had in there. And from a young age, I was obviously surrounded by that. And I think I was probably about 13. My dad kind of started teaching me to lift a bit of weight, but he was never keen on me doing a lot of weight, which was where I sort of found bodyweight training, lots of pull-ups, those kind of things. And so I started young. And as kind of a lot of my friends wanted to go out drinking and doing that side of things, I was quite focused on the gym. And always have been, really. Like, it's always been a huge, huge part of my life. So, making the transition, yes, I am a normal person in triathlon sense, but from the dedication and being strict with diet, strict with routine, getting enough sleep, all of those elements actually cross over quite nicely. There are whilst there's lots of things that are very different, there's lots of things that are very similar. And I keep saying to people, like, I eat like a bodybuilder and train like an athlete, because what I'm really surprised is I've cut my weights right back. I do one all over body session a week, and that's it. And I haven't lost, I think my body composition has changed a little bit, but I haven't lost any muscle mass at all. In fact, I'm heavier now than when I started, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But again, I eat like I'm bodybuilding. So I eat and I make sure I've got a calorie surplus so that I've got plenty of energy to be able to do the sheer workload of training, really.
So what do you weigh?
94 kilos.
Okay. So for a triathlete, that's fairly large, fairly heavy.
Yep.
Which from some respects is not ideal.
Yeah.
Especially on the running side of things.
Or going up hills on a bike.
Or going up hills on a bike. Yeah. But you don't. It doesn't seem to be becoming. It's not too much of a barrier to you. You seem to be, getting the rides done okay, getting the running done okay. I know we've got some kind of niggles on the knees and things, but it doesn't seem to be a big barrier. I wonder if some people think that, you need to be a skinny little racing snake.
Well, I did.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what you thought, and you realise now that you doesn't necessarily need to be like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that coming on. So I saw that video, saw about the Ironman. I didn't even know what an Ironman was, and it's probably less than 18 months ago. I didn't even know what an Ironman was. I'd seen the watches when I was a kid, the 1980s watches that they used to do, but never really knew much about it. But what happened then is I started Googling and looking and ended up right down a rabbit hole with it. And there's a guy in the States called Alex Viada, who's kind of right at the forefront of it all, actually. So he's a bodybuilder and powerlifter. He's huge, 230 odd pounds, and he looks like a bodybuilder. But he's done a huge amount of Ironmans. He's done a huge amount of endurance sports, and what he does is backs it up by the science. So he goes really, really deep into the science of hybrid training and mixing the modalities of weightlifting and strength training with things like triathlon and endurance sports. And it was really him that kind of got me hooked, because the detail and the level that he goes into. And what happened there is I then found, like, Chris Gethin who was a bodybuilder, did an Ironman. I mean, his time was terrible, but hopefully I'll beat that. But he did one. Yeah. And you start actually finding there's quite a lot of people. There's a guy called Nick Bear in the States who has actually gone from a physiques athlete to now is doing really well in the sport. He's become a full-on triathlete. He still looks very good, but he's doing really, really well. Another guy in Scotland is a guy called Fergus Crawley, and he's been doing this very similar thing. He's come from a weightlifting background. He now does lots of Ironman, sponsored by Gymshark. And what I see is a lot of people coming from this weightlifting space and almost moving over or sort of incorporating more of this, because I think we're more aware now of. Certainly when I was a kid, it was just about looking good and nothing else. It didn't matter. If you were unhealthy, as long as you looked good, that didn't really make much difference. We didn't care. Whereas I think people are a lot more aware of being fitter now. And I also think COVID helped, because people couldn't go to gyms. And what I've found is I don't really like training indoors anymore, because I've got used to going out and training outside. When I have to train indoors, I don't really enjoy it in the same way. And I think that's a big part of it, and kind of the move towards people getting into it. But I think as some of these thicker guys, especially as some of them start to do, they're never probably going to be at elite level and winning championships. But as they start doing better within the sports, I think you'll see a lot more people and heavier people moving over.
That's interesting. Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm aware. I always think about James Cracknell, who's Olympic gold medalist rower.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know of James, but he always kind of jumps to mind, because I'm not exactly sure how much he weighed, but he was a big guy. I think he was kind of, 17 stone or this kind of thing. So a big, strong rowing machine, and went out and ran the London Marathon in sub 3. So for a big guy, pretty damn impressive.
Massively.
But he's known for being mentally very, very strong.
Yeah.
He's used to putting himself on the limit with rowing, and I think to achieve that kind of Olympic gold medals and kind of go to that level, to reach that kind of that level of ability, you need to have a huge amount of mental strength to put yourself through that training. And I think certainly for endurance events, athletes, for Ironman and for running marathons, it's certainly beneficial for you to have that kind of mindset. And I've noticed this about you actually, is that you like to challenge yourself. You know, if you think something is going to be hard, then it makes you want to do it even more, doesn't it?
Especially if other people say, no, you can't do that. I guess I'm just that rebellious teenager that if you tell me no, I want to do it. But that's quite true of why this has happened for me, really, is because you tell people, I'm thinking about doing an Ironman. They're like, what's the distance? Oh, it's 2.5 mile swim, 112 miles on a bike and a marathon. And they're like, what, on different days? No, back to back. And all of a sudden people go, you can't do that. Yeah. And as soon as somebody tells me that, it's like, well, actually, I could do that. And it makes me want to do it. And I do think there's a massive crossover. You have to be fairly resilient to want to get into these kind of sort of, certainly the long distance stuff. But I have this belief that I've sort of come across since I've been doing this. I do feel that, not everybody will, but I do feel it's the sort of thing everybody should do at some point in their life. One, to see how far they can take it. But with me, it's about, the thing I like about running is it gets you into that, when you get into that zone where you almost forget where you are, what you're doing, you're just very, very blinkered. And when I did the marathon, I've told a few people the story. I don't know if I've actually ever told you the story, but when I did the marathon, I did a lot of the rave scene when I was younger, and I worked doors at Creamfields and all over. And at the end of a festival, you tend to get people that have probably taken too many drugs, and they've got the foil blankets on, and they're all huddled in the corner, and it's the end of the night. Well, when I did the marathon, I ran the first sort of 16, 17 miles with no music. And then I lost the guy that I was running with. So I put my headphones on and I started listening to some like really old trance music. It was really pulled me through. Yeah. And as you ran out of Brighton, it was sort of mile 19, 20 by this point. You start seeing everybody in the foil blankets and they're all curled up on the street and ambulances. And I went into this like weird zone where in my mind I was running through a festival, and it sounds really stupid saying it, but I wasn't in Brighton. I was in this like, I don't know, it sounds very stupid now I'm saying it out loud, but I've said it in my head so many times. But going to that place, 90% of people never do it, and they don't actually know what it feels like to go to that place. And I think that's a waste. I think knowing where we can go and how far we can push ourselves, because fatigue is, I think it's the Navy SEALs that say you fatigue at about 40% of where you could go. You've got so much left that you just don't know how to tap into. Yeah. And I really buy into that. And for me, that's the exciting part is, well, how far can I go? How far can I push this body of mine? Not very far if you look at my knees, but it's so, that's kind of what excites me with it. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because you need to kind of, your body almost puts those safety mechanisms in place, like you say, very, very early to protect you, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And it's not until you push through those and you realise what you're capable of doing that becomes the new norm, doesn't it? Yeah. That becomes the new limits almost. Yeah, well, now it feels an Ironman feels very, whether I'm saying this halfway through Ironman Barcelona is another conversation, but right now it feels achievable. Yeah. 6-7 months ago, it didn't feel anywhere near achievable, it felt like a distant thing in the future. But again, I think that really shows how adaptive we are as humans. And I think you can take that into every single other part of your life, that something may feel very difficult. It's been the same with business. Something feels very difficult or very far ahead that it's impossible to do. You achieve it, or you get close to achieving it, and actually it becomes the norm, and it's what's next. Yeah. And I have to admit, when we first started doing this training, I really found it overwhelming. There was a couple of days that I'd look in Training Peaks and genuinely be like, is he taking the mick? I can't do that. That's ridiculous. I'm going to go swimming for an hour, then come back, do an hour and a half on the bike. Then he wants me to do, I'm thinking, and it really mentally overwhelmed me. Whereas now, because we're not doing so much running because of my knee, like yesterday I was tired, as you know, and I ended up I didn't swim in the evening. And I actually sat there thinking, you don't deserve to be tired. You haven't done any running this week. you haven't got the right to be fatigued. Yeah. But it's funny how we adjust, and I think that's been a big lesson for me about it, is that you can really adjust to anything, and I think that's quite an exciting. I also read and I don't know where you sit with this or whether you found this, but I read I think it was in Inc. magazine, and it said something like, I don't quote me on the statistics, that around 1 in 1,000 people in America have done an Ironman and completed an Ironman. Okay. If you put that same statistic in a room of businessmen and entrepreneurs, it's something like 1 in 500. Yeah. And I think that to me shows there's a certain mentality that is attracted to it. Yeah. No, absolutely. In terms of coaching, I see
there's definite characteristics that you see, the similarities across people who maybe don't drop in and do a triathlon and then go back out again, but certainly who's come into the sport and stay in the sport and are competitive within the sport, whether it be on a European or an international level, or whether it just be against themselves and they keep on trying to beat their own times. You absolutely do see that. It's kind of almost like addictive personality types. And I count myself in that because
I'm familiar.
Yeah, and they're compulsive, obsessive. You need to, if you're going to do something, you're going to do something well. I mean, you commented on the setup here for the podcast.
Yeah,
it's a new setup, but if you're going to do something, you're going to do it well, right?
Yeah.
So no, absolutely, I see it time and time again, and that can be what drives people on. I talk about kind of James Cracknell. You can't achieve these kind of things unless you are really willing to get properly stuck into what you're doing. It's just not. You can't half do an Ironman, can you? You can't half do Ironman.
I don't know, 70.3.
But you know what I mean? That you can't. You just wouldn't if you kind of dabbled at doing from zero, dabbled at doing the training and kind of did a bit of running and did a bit of you just wouldn't make it round. It just wouldn't happen. You can't half do things like that.
No.
And yeah, see it time again. But equally, people that have that, I kind of, for myself, it's definitely a strength and a weakness.
100%.
Being like that.
Yeah.
Because you do become it. You start to let it take over your life. You can let it start take over your life, can't you? To the detriment of work and family and all these other things. So absolutely have to watch out for that.
Yeah, definitely. I've fallen victim to that many a time, and I'm an overthinker as well. And I use this quote quite a lot, but it once took me 2 weeks to buy an iron. Like genuinely, it was like a 50, 60 quid iron. It took me 2 weeks to buy it. I mean, it took me nearly a month to buy my bike. And by the time, I remember I was out running, by the time I'd bought my bike, literally anybody who came past me on a bike would be like, it's a BMC time machine. Oh, that's a such. And I'd know every single bike on the street. Yeah, because I just read every single review about every single bike I could possibly find. And you've got to have that blinkered, go down a rabbit hole kind of personality, I think, to be able to commit to something enough to see it through. Because I know lots of people that even at this point now would probably go, maybe I've bit off a bit more than I could chew. Because I'll be honest, I definitely underestimated, although it scared me, I definitely underestimated the level of training that you've got to do to do it. And there's been times where I thought, maybe I've bitten off a bit more than I can chew here. Like I've got a 15-month-old at home. I've got multiple businesses that I run. So it's not like I'm sat doing not much. I'm busy.
Yeah. But
actually, that's the part of it is, I once read a quote that said, be naive enough to start and stubborn enough to finish. And that pretty much sums up my life is I'd say yes to stuff. Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll give it a go. And then once I've said yes, I'm doing it come hell or high water, no matter what. And there has been discussions with my wife where she said, Rich, because I teach myself, you teach on a Monday, you're swimming on a Tuesday, you're swimming on a Thursday, like you're not at home enough, you're going to be doing this forever now. And I say, no, don't worry about it. It's just temporary. Once I get through the Ironman, we'll be fine. But the other thing is, I said to her that there's no way I'm backing off now. Like I'm here, this is happening. No matter if I've got to train every evening, 7 days a week for the rest of the time until October, that's what's going to happen because I've said I'm doing it. I've told enough people that it keeps me accountable. Yeah. It's happening, And if this knee doesn't work, then I'll crawl the marathon. But that's one by hook or by crook, I will get across that line.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got no doubt that you will as well. Knowing you as well as I do after this amount of time. So let's take you on your journey through what you've done so far. So let's talk about the swimming, your favourite subject, Rich. How do you describe where you were coming from as a swimmer?
Well, actually, I remember you saying to me, "Can you swim?" And I went, "Yeah, I'm a pretty good swimmer."
Yeah.
But my idea of swimming was I've done a bit of diving, and it's like you come to the surface and you kick your fins or you do a bit of breaststroke to the boat, and that was my idea of swimming. And I thought I've always genuinely saw myself as a good swimmer. And a bit of a funny story about that. When I was about 19, I was a bit lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life at all, and I spent quite a few years like that. I remember applying to be an air steward with Virgin Airlines, and they said on the questionnaire, it said, how far can you swim? And I put about 2 miles. There's no way I could have swum 2 miles, but in my mind, that 2 miles don't sound very far. That'll be okay. And I often think about that now because obviously I'm doing so much swimming. But I sometimes wonder if that's why they just literally just laughed at it and threw it in the bin, you know? The 19-year-old saying he could swim 2 miles. But I think for me, I thought I would have always told you, not at Olympic standard, but I'd have always said I'm a pretty good swimmer. What I've now realised is that I was a terrible swimmer and I'm now slightly less terrible, but swimming does not come natural to me at all.
Yeah.
We did, at Solihull one day, we did the exercise where you go to the deep end and you exhale. And I was with 3 ladies and they exhaled all their lungs and they just bobbed, just their mouth just above the water. I exhaled all of mine and could fully lie on the bottom of the pool, like I was flat on my back, lie there completely on the bottom. So naturally I sink.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I do find swimming really hard. I find that I get quite out of breath and do struggle with that side of swimming. And I also, the thing I find hard in the pool is I sometimes find it's just a bit like start, stop. So I definitely prefer open water because you kind of, it feels like you go out with an intention. And I know you can do that. I'm going to do X length, so I'm going to do X meters in the pool. But it feels like I'm going to go today, I'm going to do 3 laps. I'm going to go today, I'm going to do 4 laps. And there's that kind of, you're setting that intention before you go. And for me, that definitely helps. But the thing is, I want to be a good swimmer. Like, I've spent a lot, since doing open water, I now spend a lot of time watching other people do it. And that really works for me. Like the whole reason I got into this was watching YouTube videos and seeing people doing it. And open water swimming's starting to be a bit like that. So I'm watching these videos of people doing various different challenges and various different, I mean, I follow Ross Edgley quite a lot and he'll go out and do a 25-kilometre training swim. And you're like, and I'm coming to the lake and struggling to do 2,000 metres. Yeah. And he's going out and doing like he did a 10K swim in a pool not so long back at somewhere that I go, which is like a heated, not a sports pool at all. And you think, this has to get easier. Like, I mean, he was a water polo player, so he comes from a swimming background. Yeah. But I do believe that if I keep digging in with swimming, then I'll get there. Yeah. I think I'll limp my way through the Ironman, but I do think if I keep it up and keep coming, then I will get to kind of a reasonable level. Not even from a speed perspective, but doing kind of longer distance swim stuff does appeal to me. There's some really cool. I mean, even with like Ironmans and triathlons, some of the events, I think I've got this. They actually say there's a certain type of DNA that some people have that makes them seek out adventure more than other people. And I often wonder if I've got that, because that's the bit that excites me. Like when I say I'm doing Ironman Barcelona, people say, well, why don't you just do it in the UK? Well, that's not got the adventure side to it. Like I feel like I'm going on this quest to Barcelona to complete this task. And that's the bit that excites me about it. It's that adventure side of it. It's so more than, I'm not sure, and maybe we'll have this conversation in 12 months, 2 years' time, and I'll have changed my mind, but I don't think it's necessarily about me trying to get to a point where I'm an elite triathlete. But I love to do these triathletes all over the world and experience these different things. And when you start looking into it, there's ones that go across country to country, and you swim in one country and you bike in other countries, and there's some really cool stuff out there. And it's a world that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, from my perspective, your swimming really has come on because you were struggling in the early days.
Dragging my legs along the bottom of the pool.
Well, 1 or 2 lengths and having a good breather, I mean, the thing with swimming is it does take dedication, it does take consistency, and that's difficult when you don't enjoy it. So, lesson number 1 really from me is you've got to find a way to, maybe saying enjoy it is maybe pushing it a little bit, but at least find it acceptable. Yeah. And if that means using buoyancy shorts and pool buoys and MP3 players, or swimming with a squad is easier because you're going through the same pain, if you like, with other people. Whatever it takes to keep you coming and to get the volume in is what you need to keep on doing, and you've done that. I know there's been a few wobbles along the way, hasn't there?
Most definitely.
Because it is frustrating. I know that as well, because I'm not from a swimming background, and I've always struggled technically on the swim. But volume can take you a hell of a long way. We can tweak the technique and things, and we do that as we go. But volume is king, and ultimately, you're not going to win the Ironman swim, but you're going to. You get the volume in, at least you can get out without having caused yourself too much kind of
that's the main
generated
thing,
too much fatigue.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I mean, and you're doing regular open water swims, and you're chipping away at the distance or knocking the distance up each time you go and things. So I don't think it's not going to be a problem for you.
It feels less of a problem now. I mean, open water's definitely helped. Like it feels achievable now. It wasn't that many months ago. I'm not sure when. I think it was March time we had the conversation where I was ready to throw the towel in. I remember going to the Stratford session, and I think it was an endurance-based session, and I just felt like I couldn't do it. I don't know why. Just that day, I had a day where I just felt like I cannot swim. Like this just isn't working. My shoulders felt sore. I felt like I was just constantly struggling. And I remember being on a massive downer that day and just thinking, this isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But I also think that's the benefit of having a coach, because had I not have then gone to you and said, Dave, mate, I'm not enjoying this. Like I'm struggling. And you said, well, you only fail if you quit.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need that, because I think if you didn't have that accountability, potentially when it got to that point, you'd go, oh, sod it, nobody really knows. It doesn't matter. I'm not accountable to anybody. I won't bother. And I wonder how many people have started journeys and not finished them for that reason. Like I really believe in accountability. I have somebody that does my nutrition for me. I've worked with him for years. He probably can't really teach me anything now that I don't already know, but having the accountability of somebody to answer to, that's the bit that makes the difference.
It's so true. And I think in terms of people taking on triathlon coaches, absolutely. I think some people, a lot of people know exactly how to put a training program together. I always think it's better for you to have a coach, for that to be taken away from your own kind of possession. But yeah, I think a lot of people do it because they know that once a week or however long, whatever the arrangement is with your coach, you've got to come up with a raft of really poor excuses if you haven't been doing things, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely.
And what about the cycling? How's the cycling going?
I love the cycling, and it's really, really strange because I said I rode BMX as a kid, and we, I don't want to use the word hated, but like we were BMXers, and road cyclists were like, we hated road cyclists. And you're riding around in Lycra and all, and it's funny because I would have openly, 12, 18 months ago, if you'd have turned up to my house in Lycra, I would have given you some grief about it. And now, I mean, I was walking around central London after doing the 100-mile bike race, I don't know if it was last Sunday or Sunday before, and I didn't actually hear it, but my wife said, oh, did you hear what that lady said to you? And I said, no. She said, oh, you're apparently I can't remember what it was, a milder or something, and it's basically middle-aged man in Lycra. Yeah. And to be honest, the Lycra bit didn't, but it was the middle-aged man bit that offended me. Like I was deeply offended by the middle-aged man part. But I wear the Lycra with pride now. Like, that's one of the best bits about cycling. I quite like the Lycra. But for me, the thing I really like is life's quite busy and life's quite noisy and family and work and all the rest of it. And I think most of us have had that. Life's quite busy. Going out, and it's funny because we go out and we do 4, 5, 6 hour bike rides. And I would have thought that would be a massive pain, to be honest with you, because it's a huge chunk out of your day. Yeah. What I find is I go out early, got 5:30, 6 a.m. I put my phone on silent. Apart from when I'm asleep, there is no time of 5 hours of no phone. And I tend to put an audiobook on, or sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just go out into the countryside, and I feel like I get out on this little mini adventure where I get to see the world. And I've seen some really, really. You go out at the crack of dawn, you see loads of wildlife. You see some, and it makes me realise how beautiful where we live is, and what scenery we've got around us. Yeah. And I tend to do them on a Sunday, and I mean, I'm a big believer that you can't be unhappy if you're grateful, in all aspects of life. If you feel gratitude, you're happy. And that is probably the highlight of my week from a gratitude perspective. I'm riding through the countryside, I'm on my own, there's nobody else around, I'm looking around, and you just think, yeah, do you know what, life's good? Yeah. And that's what I love about cycling. That's the part of it that I really, really enjoy, is just getting out on my own in that space. I mean, I've never really rode in that many groups, and I know people say that's the part of cycling that makes it even better, and perhaps it does. But for me, I've just found having that space has been really good for me, not just from a sport perspective, but also in other areas of life, just having that downtime in that space. Yeah, no, it's really important to have that time to yourself, isn't it? But yeah, I love cycling. I really, I said this to my wife and she didn't actually believe what I said, is if somebody said to me tomorrow, you've either got to pick weights, cycling, swimming or running, which one would you pick? And it would be cycling. Genuinely, if I had to pick one, it'd be cycling. Yeah. I would quit. I mean, I feel saying it now, but I would quit the gym before I'd quit cycling now. What do your gym mates think about what you're doing? Actually, most of them are pretty supportive of it because it's so far away from what we do. Most of them think I'm mental, And I've tried to. I mean, I've brought one of my friends to swimming, and he came, and he hasn't been since. And he keeps saying, "Man, I'm coming to open water. I'm coming." I think he's actually paid and bought for like 40 sessions of open water or 20 sessions of open water or something. But he hasn't been yet, and he keeps saying it. But again, he's like, because I'm sort of saying to him, "Well, maybe you should get into this," and he's like, "No chance, absolutely no chance. I'm not interested at all." So most of them, whilst it's not their thing, are really supportive. I haven't actually had anybody kind of say anything negative other than "you're mental." But most of them are, and even just people like, like PTs that I know and coaches that I know in that space most of them are starting to, I don't know if it's an age thing, but most of them are starting to adopt a much more functional outlook to the way things are going. And I truly believe that. I think the fitness industry as a whole, and I think triathlon's almost on the out fringes of it because it doesn't get involved in all the nonsense of the fitness industry, your protein shakes and your white labels this and your crappy brands and all the rest of it. So it's kind of, I think triathlon's a bit more serious and a bit more people who are more athletes than just your weekend gym guys. But I do think there's a massive kind of, and it's something that I've seen in my business, it's something that I've seen in my training, that people are now more conscious of being functional in their training, being fit in their training, and about being an all-rounder rather than just being... I almost think bodybuilding as a whole is kind of shrinking because, yeah, all right, it's great. You do all this, you get massive, and to be honest, to be competitive bodybuilder, they fill themselves with loads of drugs and they shorten their lives by ridiculous amounts of time. For what? And I think I'm not slagging bodybuilding in any way, but I think for Joe Blogs, most people are having an understanding that doesn't actually complement your life, doesn't complement longevity. So I think that kind of, and certainly the way I'm going with my training is about being an all-rounder. Do I want to be an Olympian triathlete? Well, let's be honest, even if I wanted to, it's not going to happen. But what I do want to be is I want to be able to go out with you on the bike and be able to keep up. I want to be able to go out with normally saying you're not an accomplished runner, but go out with an accomplished runner and be able to keep up. I want to be able to go to a gym with a gym guy and keep up. I'm not necessarily, I think the SAS and things, they call it the grey man, the guy who can do pretty much everything. He's not the best at one thing, but he can do pretty much anything. And for me, that's what it's about now. It's about being competent at all areas, being able to jump on and do pretty much anything later into life as well. I want to be fitter into my 50s, 60s, 70s. So that's kind of the goal. I call it being a hybrid, being able to do most things. And I think everybody could benefit from some strength training. I think being able to handle your body weight and I think is a great thing. But I think sometimes because we get quite blinkered, we often just go, I'm just going to do this and nothing else. But I'm trying to kind of keep a holistic, rounded look on my training about, well, how does it benefit me in my life rather than just how big do I look in a T-shirt, which was maybe 5-10 years ago.
Well, it's interesting to say that actually you haven't lost you haven't lost any of your size particularly, even though you've been reducing the weights,
which is irritating me, to be honest, because I could do a losing. I'd like to be a bit lighter.
Yeah.
But I tried cutting my food. I thought, I wouldn't mind being a bit lighter. I'll cut my food. And what I found is that I, from an energy perspective, I started really struggling really quickly. So it's like, I'm at this like chicken and egg point where it's like, I'd quite like to lose a little bit of weight, but I've got to keep my food high because otherwise I'm not going to have the energy to complete the training. So I'm just dealing with the fact that I'm 94 kilos. I'm probably going to be racing maybe a little bit lighter with the amount of training that we're now doing, but I'm probably going to stay around there. But I have to say, I remember having the conversation with you where I said, I'm still going to do weights 3 times a week. And you said, well, the training we do is quite muscular. And I think riding a bike and swimming, muscular. But it is. And you do use a lot. My back, 100% my back has grown. I was walking through an e-commerce show a few weeks ago and somebody's going, your back's massive, you look like a bodybuilder. And I was thinking, it never used to be. That's swimming. And you look at swimmers and they tend to have quite big backs. And I think like I say, my composition and the balance in my body has definitely changed. But my overall weight hasn't. And I got to admit, one of my reservations coming into the sport was I thought I might disappear and end up looking like a very skinny endurance athlete, because that's what you think when you think endurance athlete. You think very slim, skinny guys, and that wasn't who I wanted to be. It's not. I spent a long time. The muscle that I have got, I spent a long time trying to put it on.
So in terms of just I've gone off a bit of a tangent here, but in terms of calorie intake, what were you taking in when you were doing your bodybuilding?
So it stayed pretty similar. So I mean, it depends what I was doing. I mean, I've been up to 5,000 calories a day when I've kind of done big bulks, and I don't recommend that, to be honest. It's not a nice way to live because 5,000 calories is easy. And actually, the nice thing about endurance sports, because you're using it, it's actually quite easy to eat 5,000 calories. You're going out and doing a cycle and you can eat sugary stuff and high calorie, quick digesting things. Eating 5,000 calories in chicken, broccoli and rice is actually quite difficult. And you sit there at 9 o'clock at night forcing more rice into yourself. Like, you look back and you think it's kind of pathetic, really. Like, if I was done that as a competitive athlete, fine. But I actually couldn't tell you why I was doing it. I'm not really too sure. And someone did once say to me, bodybuilding's a bit like a mental illness. You've got 25 stone blokes who are massive standing in the mirror feeling skinny. And it's so true that the problem is because we are adaptive. So you look in the mirror, maybe you put a kilo on in a month and you do it slowly in increments. You never feel any bigger. You never feel any better, that you look any better. So because of that, it can get very addictive and you always want to be bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger. So it almost is. And I know lots of people in the bodybuilding space who I would probably say have eating disorders, because then what happens is you bulk and you bulk and you bulk, and then you go, oh, I'm going to cut down now. And then when you cut down, you then start feeling really guilty for, I've gone over my calories by 200. You're ready to jump off a bridge because you've broken your diet one day. And what happens is you get this, you diet, and one day you've had a bad day, or your wife says, oh, go on, should we just have some ice cream tonight? And as soon as you get that taste, you binge. And you end up going down this ridiculous path of just eating food and food and food and food and food. And then you spend 3 days feeling really bad about it. And it's actually very, very unhealthy. So calorie intake, sort of, I would say averagely sort of 3,500, 4,000 was what I was doing bodybuilding, unless I was kind of on a cut or on a bulk. And that's, to be honest, about the same as where I'm at now, 3,500 to 4,000. On a long cycle day, I'll eat a lot more. I mean, my Garmin will tell me that I can burn 5,000 or 6,000 calories on a long cycle, which is, eating that back is quite a challenge at times. Yeah. But the one thing that I've got that bodybuilding has given me from all of those big bulks is a big appetite. And I think I have the ability to absorb quite a lot of food. And we've had many conversations about this. And I think that's actually going to be a big plus for me. When I did the marathon, I remember I ran with another first timer, and I was having 3 gels for every 1 gel he was having. And I started doubting myself, thinking, I'm having too many here. Like, he's only having 1. I'm having too many. But 16 miles, he hit a brick wall, I'd sit down. I didn't hit that brick wall till probably about mile 19, 20. And I still wouldn't say I hit a brick wall. I just fatigued and got tired. And actually, the one thing that I've realised is that's quite a gift. Like, I've gone out and cycled, as you know, and done 100 grams of carbs an hour. I did 90 grams of carbs an hour around on the London 100, and that felt absolutely fine. No sickness, no kind of over-fueling. I felt really good on that. And I think that, in a way that I would have never expected, bodybuilding has prepped me for that, because it's given me that digestive system that can handle it. Yeah,
that's that. I mean, that's a good amount of carbs. Yeah, because generally the kind of the advice is that at the top end for people to be able to absorb would be kind of 90 grams an hour.
Yep.
At the extreme kind of end almost. And you've obviously trained yourself over time to be able to absorb and for your body to process more than that. So no, absolutely, that's an advantage to you for sure. Sure, lots of people undereat when they're doing big events. They can certainly take on more than they do. Yeah. Especially for Ironman events when you're fueling for what's to come, aren't you?
Yeah, it's everything. I certainly, I mean, I would imagine that I would burn more calories than somebody 2-3 stone lighter than I am.
Yeah.
So I think fueling is going to be, without that, there's no way I'd get through it.
Yeah. What about you running?
I love running, and I'm really starting to miss it. Like, I'm mentally struggling with not running, to be honest. This whole knee thing's, I mean, it's kind of self-inflicted. I don't know if it is or isn't. I mean, so my knee kept going anyway, and it was sore cycling, it was sore running, and as we do, we kind of, it's not that bad. Idiotically, I then skied on it, which triggered it and made it worse. Now, what I'm telling myself in my head is, well, maybe if I hadn't skied on it, now it might have got injured and would be starting the rest process now, even closer to the event. I mean, that's how I'm justifying it in my mind. But injury is actually really quite a difficult thing to get your head around. And I know to people that do this all the time, they probably are well aware of that. But it's something that I kind of underestimated, because in bodybuilding, you injure yourself, you train around it. Like, you just find an exercise or a movement or a certain modality that doesn't hurt, and you just train around the injury till it's healed.
Yeah.
You can't do that with knees and I imagine with shoulders, swimming and things like that as well. Like because it's quite set, the modalities and the muscle groups that you use, it's very difficult to train around things. And mentally, that's really tough. I think that's tougher than the training, is actually that my mind wants to run, my body wants to run, but my knee doesn't want to run. And I don't know how, I guess you just get mentally resilient to that. I suffered a bad back from a deadlifting injury. And to be honest, that was one of the most debilitating injuries I've ever had. Like everything was uncomfortable. Sitting, sleeping, lying, standing. It was uncomfortable all of the time. And I remember, I think this is the only thing that helps me with my knee. Because I remember thinking at the time, this is me now. I'm going to have a bad back forever. Like it's never going to be better. And I suffered with it for probably 18 months. And I never thought my back would be back to 100%. And it is now. And I think that's the bit that's pulling me through my knee. Because at the moment, it feels like, how the hell am I going to run a marathon? I can't run to the bottom of the street. But equally so, I know that the body can heal quite quickly in the right circumstances. And that actually, when you think you'll never heal, most of the time you do in one way or another. So that's what's kind of keeping me through. But I really like going out for long runs. Again, I think it's that going out into my own space. The other thing that I find quite amusing is we talk about, the body adapting and mentally we adapt. When we were doing the marathon and it was like go and run for 2 hours, training for 2 hours seemed huge. And I know you can't compare running with cycling from an energy perspective, but just from a mental time perspective, going out and running for 2.5 hours felt like a huge amount of time. Now you'll say go and cycle for 3.5 hours, and I'm thinking, is that it? Yeah. And I'll come back like, it's only 9:30 in the morning. Like, I've still got my whole day.
Yeah.
And it's funny how you mentally adjust, because you've done 5-6 hour rides. All of a sudden, a 3 hour ride feels like nothing.
Yeah.
And I quite look forward to that from a running perspective, because going out and doing a 2 or 3 hour run now, whilst would be hard on the body, don't get me wrong, mentally wouldn't feel like that longer time. And I think that's one of the things that would put most people off. So I've got a friend that's just, he likes to get drunk and doesn't really do a lot in any fitness at all. But every time I do a long cycle, I send it him and he's just like, what's wrong with you? He's like, I don't even like driving my car 100 miles. Like, what is wrong with you? And to him, it's like just the complete opposite end of anything. Yeah. But the thought of doing that and to be honest, I'd have been like that. Like the thought of going out and riding the bike for 6 hours. I don't like driving the car for 6 hours. The thought of doing that mentally is a huge undertaking. Yeah. And I think the key, and I found this, and I think this will be the key for the event, was, let's say when we were doing swimming back-to-back with cycling, if you start swimming, you think about, I've got this whole hour of swimming to do, and then when I get back, I've got another, and this was right at the beginning, another hour and a half of cycling to do. What I found, if I actually thought about that, I would ruin my swimming session thinking about what I had next. And it would have been exactly the same, like when we did the London 100 and it was a 6 hour bike ride, I knew it was going to take me about 6 hours. If within the first hour I started thinking, I've still got 5 hours to go, there's no way to mentally overcome that. But what I did is go, and I'm a sets and reps guy because I come from the gym. So my Garmin will flash every 5 miles. So I knew I had 20 reps to do of these 5 miles. So I'd be like, that's rep 1, that's 19 to go. And I mentally went through it in stages. And I think, I've never done an Ironman yet, but I think that's got to be key. And I to be honest, look forward to what you'd say on that. But breaking it down into those small little chunks to get to that end goal. Yeah.
No, we quite frequently say to people, if there's anything like that, even from a 20-minute FTP test to a marathon, then absolutely you got to break it up mentally. Yeah. Because you just can't. It's difficult to get your head around big chunks of time. Yeah. Isn't it? You just see one big suffer fest. Whereas, I was thinking about again FTP tests in terms of mentally dividing it up. So it's going to be painful and you're going to suffer, but at least the first 5 minutes should feel pretty almost. I almost feel like you get the first 5 minutes for free because you're fresh. Yeah. The last 5 minutes is going to be empty in the tank. Yeah. The middle 10 minutes are quite difficult because you're kind of holding power, and then the third 5 minutes is particularly difficult because you're really starting to kick in there. Yeah. And, so but you can divvy it up into little blocks, and absolutely the longer it goes. Doing long distance races, dividing it up into laps or dividing it up into kilometers or miles or between aid stations. It's a really good way of looking at it. Aid stations is a good one depending on how well they're spaced out. Right. Okay. Because say aid stations on an Ironman course, sometimes you can get to the aid station both directions if it's an out and back. So you get a lot of aid stations. So it may well be you're hitting an aid station every 1.5 miles or something. Oh, okay. So you're doing, like you said there, you're doing lots of 1.5 mile intervals. Yeah. With a a sip of water or a gel or whatever.
The mind can cope with that.
Yeah, and you can break it down.
But knowing you've got 140 miles left to go is the mind struggles with that.
Yeah.
But again, I think the really cool thing about that, which is why I do think everybody should have a go at, if it's not a full Ironman, like a half or some kind of challenging endurance triathlon sport. And I think it has to be triathlon or something multi-modality, like maybe adventure racing or something like that. But it has to be something like that, because knowing you've got so much in front of you, in my opinion, is exactly the same as setting a goal in life. You could set a goal of where you want to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years. If you thought about every step you're going to have to take, and I see this with people all the time, you get quite overwhelmed and then they stop and they don't do it. And I think this is exactly the same thing. Like if you literally, like when I first read the numbers on an Ironman, it scared the life out of me because it was so overwhelming. Like, what? You want me to do what? But when you get into it, and for me to say I'm going to go from 0 to doing it within a year, bearing in mind I didn't own a bike, didn't own a wetsuit, would probably swim 4 or 5 lengths and that would be me done, would be hugely overwhelming. But by breaking it down into these little blocks that we have, these 8-week blocks, that you just focus on what's ahead and you focus on each individual block, that makes it feel a lot more achievable. And I just think there's so much of that comes into everyday life. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And that's the bit, again, that I love about it, is knowing that you can set these kind of audacious goals. And then if you put a plan in place and you work through it, you can achieve it.
So what do you think, obviously there's going to be people listening to this who are where you were before we started, you know, and they want to do a middle distance or even an Ironman straight from scratch. Is there anything that you would do differently?
That's a good question.
Presumably you recommend having a coach for one.
100%, yeah. Well, I could have said, I wouldn't have had a coach, just on my own. And do you know what? I couldn't have done it without a coach. It's as simple as that. I wouldn't have even known where to start. You could have maybe read books and things, but again, without that accountability, you'd get to a point where you'd go, because you don't know how hard it should or shouldn't be. Yeah. So sometimes I can speak to you and I'm like, Dave, mate, this isn't happening. Like, I'm really, really struggling. And you go, yeah, it's completely normal. Without you saying that, I wouldn't know it. And there's been times like with my knee where I'm injured, where I'm thinking it's all over. And you're saying, no, Rich, it's fine. I'm not worried. You'll get through it. And those are the things that stop you quitting when things get tough. So I think having a coach is for longer distance stuff, definitely essential. If you want to get good, and I think that of all elements in life, it's the same. As I said, I've got a nutrition coach, and it's not necessarily about what he teaches me, it's that accountability. With you, I've got the accountability, but also I wouldn't have even known where to start or what to do or anything about this style of training in the slightest. So having a coach was definitely something that I would 100% have done. What would I have done differently? Not injured my knee? Not gone skiing?
Not gone skiing a bit. What about kit? You know, buying kit.
Do you know what?
I know there's lots of opportunities to buy stuff in triathlon, isn't there?
It's not cheap. Well, I often think that's why they say in a room of entrepreneurs there's more kind of triathletes and Ironmans, because nobody else can afford the bloody stuff. Like, it's not a cheap sport, and you do have to go into it knowing that. I have to admit, I thought, well, a couple of grand on a bike and that's a wetsuit and that's me done. And it's like, you need these 500 quid pedals, and you need this 200 quid computer, and you need something else. But actually, what I would have probably done differently, if I'm honest, I would have probably bought, although I really like my bike, it's a good bike, I've got a Trek in mind, I would have probably bought a more aero bike, like the Madone or something like that, or a Giant Propel or something. I'd have probably bought something that I could have put tri-bars on.
You know your bikes well now, don't you?
Yeah, I know, ridiculously so, honestly. And it's funny because I find myself doing that. Like, I'll be driving the car and somebody will come past me in traffic and I'll be like, so such and such. And I'll say to my wife, it's about a 10 grand bike. And she'll be like, why do you know this? Again, it comes down to that personality that when I was looking for my bike, I literally read every review, all the different types of bikes, all the different things. And I bought my bike because from the reviews that I read, it would be more comfortable, better for longer distances. It was also from a price point perspective, a lot more reasonably priced than some of the aero bikes. But I'd have probably gone, knowing what I know now, I'd have probably gone all in a bit quicker. But equally so at the time, although I knew I was going to do an Ironman and I was going to get through it, I didn't know if it was for me as such. I just knew that I'm going to do this challenge, and I can't see me liking cycling, was what I would have told you. Can't see me liking putting Lycra on and riding around, but it's just something I'll have to do.
Yeah.
But actually, just like cycling, that's as long as I can cycle, I will cycle now. But I'm 80 years old, and I think that's the other great thing about cycling is you can do it well into older age. You're not worried about joints and things like with running. I think your risk of injury with cycling is a lot lower than other sports. You can cycle until the cows come home, really. So I would have probably bought a more expensive bike if I'm being honest.
Okay. What did you pay for your bike?
2.5.
Okay.
I bought it on the cycle to work scheme.
Okay.
I won't say too much on that.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, paid 2.5 for it. The Madone that I like is 5, so it's quite a chunk difference. But I keep looking at them and I keep thinking about it, and I'm like, well, I'm here now. Let's just do what we're doing on the bike that you've got, and then look at it after. But yeah, I mean, the kit is expensive. It's not a cheap sport. It's not the kind of thing you necessarily go and. I mean, the event was 600 quid on its own.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I was talking about it the other day because like of the event, the flights, the coaching, the bike, the turbo trainer, the multiple pairs of running shoes that I've bought, the wetsuit. It mounts up. But then I live on this premise that I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't eat crappy food. I'm not buying takeaways. I do eat out a bit, but not crappy food. And I think, well, actually, there's a lot worse things you could be spending your money on than things that are making you fitter, healthier, getting you out more. Like, if there's one thing that you can spend your money, I have a lot of sports massages. I don't begrudge paying money for coaching, nutrition coaching, or any of that, because if there's one thing I think you should spend money on, it's your health. I think it's LeBron James, one of the famous basketballers, spends $1 million a year on coaching and massages and things. And you just think, well, I'm not LeBron James and I'm never going to be. But equally so, these guys that have the understanding and the money, you've almost got to follow that you have to invest in. Put sport aside, you've got to invest in your health, especially as you grow older. It's something that I've become a lot more aware of, definitely.
I guess someone like LeBron James, if he's earning multi-million pounds a
From
year,
his body,
if he can extend his career by a couple of years, then it's a worthwhile investment, isn't it? Over
Definitely,
time?
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if there's anything I would have done differently, to be honest.
So we've guided you pretty well, is what you're saying.
Definitely, you led me into that very well. But
It wasn't a loaded question. But,
no, but you have. I mean, like I say, I wouldn't. And you've got me involved in the sport in quite a nice way. And even with the swim squads and the coffees after and things that you do, like, it's got me involved with, to be honest, a bunch of people that I probably wouldn't meet day to day.
yeah, weird skinny people that bodybuilders wouldn't have.
Yeah, exactly. But equally so, I quite like being the kind of odd grape in the bunch. I quite like coming from a different angle with things.
Yeah.
And I think often we can learn a lot in life by looking at different angles and different things and different modalities. And yeah, I quite like being the oddball that, still lifts weights. And I still go into the gym, and I go in once a week, but I still focus on mainly strength stuff because I want to keep that power that I've put all the work into. And I do think that some of it does cross over. Like, if I could get this endurance swimming up, I'm quick for 25 metres, and then I'm knackered. But if I could get the endurance element of that, I've got the power. I've got the upper body power. If you could get the power and the technique and the endurance, potentially I could be a reasonable swimmer. Because one of the challenges that people have is the power element. Well, that's already there. So I think there are certain things that cross over quite well. I've never had the strongest legs, to be honest. The legs have never been my strongest point. But equally so, I think that's probably part of why cycling's come on, because my legs are stronger than an average person coming off the street would be. So I do think there are things that cross over and complement quite well. And I do think there are things that are a disability. So I don't have a huge amount of mobility in my shoulders, which again impacts swimming in a negative way.
Yeah.
I'm a bit stiff all over. And there's definitely, and also being heavier, and muscle doesn't tend to float quite as well as fat. So you tend to be a bit sinky. So that's definitely a hindrance. It's funny, isn't it? Because if you think about triathletes, by definition, they are hybrid, because swimming does not really complement, other than your cardiovascular system, it doesn't really complement cycling or running. In fact, if anything, it's the other way around, because runners tend to have we were talking about this the other day, runners have quite stiff ankles and things, and swimmers tend to be very loose in that way. And cyclists tend to have chunkier legs, but legs are quite heavy for a swimmer and will make you sink. So actually the modalities are not there to complement each other. They're actually they almost work against each other in some ways.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We do frequently see especially people who are coming to us as maybe older athletes who've been runners. They mechanically they don't move too well in the water sometimes.
Yeah,
for sure.
Sounds
Absolutely.
familiar. I'm not a runner, but mechanically moving in the water sounds familiar.
The ones that seem to have it the easiest are the swimmers.
Yeah.
So people who have come from a decent, a regular swim club background.
Right.
They move well, they're fit, and it's becoming a better swimmer later in life is tough. It's tough. If you're not coming from a swimming background at all, it's tough. And I can see within a length or two people that have, even if they haven't swum for 30 years, if they were a good swimmer when they were a kid, you can see it in the way that they move. Mm-hmm. You can't do it the other way around.
Well, did you know Eddie Hall is a really good swimmer?
Oh, really? No.
Because he swam at national level as a kid in his teens before he found strongman.
Right.
There's a few videos of him online swimming and doing various swimming challenges and things.
And he can swim okay.
He can swim for the size of the guy. Yeah. He can still move quite well. I mean, it's a massive disability being the size he is.
Yeah.
But again, going back to what you said, because he swam at national level as a kid, he's still got that movement pattern, and I really believe in that. I mean, I did jiu-jitsu as a kid, so probably from the age of about 8 until I was about 14. And I remember going and doing martial arts when I was sort of 22, 23. And we went in with this coach, and he threw us over, and I landed kind of on my left-hand side in exactly the right position I should have been in. And straight away he said, "You've done martial arts before?" And I went, "Well, I did a bit as a kid, but not a lot." And he said, "They taught you how to fall, and that stayed with you for life." And I really believe in that, which is why my little one's gone to gymnastics today at 15 months old. He's going swimming on Friday at 15 months old, because I want to get those patterns into him as quickly as I can and really encourage that, because they stay with you for life. And that core strength and ability that you build as a kid is really everything.
Yeah.
So I do think, and I do think that's probably, like I say, what's helped me with the bike is I spent my whole childhood with bikes and on bikes and building bikes and riding bikes. And although we used to think that riding to Salvan was a long way back then, but...
I was the same, actually. I used to ride a bike all the time when I was a kid. I used to live on a BMX.
Yeah.
Kind of typical 1980s,
You ever tried to buy one now? You've seen the price of them?
I happen to have a Mark 1 Rally Burner.
I bet that's probably getting on the ground if it's in good condition.
Yeah, no, it's refurbished. If anyone knows about them, it's a rally. It's a super tough, so it's got skyways and all this kind of stuff. So and I got it.
Don't tell me it's yellow and blue, because that's the colour I always wanted.
No. It's gold. It's gold. It's a classic kind of gold one. And I don't. People like everything in this world. There are communities that are really into things, as we've kind of touched on before, and the BMX world is no different. No. So there's a whole world. Well, you this is your thing, isn't it? You've got a
I've just sold a bike business, actually. Yes, I did. Yeah. I've been in the BMX industry since 2012, so I know it quite well.
Yeah, so they like their BMXs, and this community. I'm thinking about a particular Facebook community. So they think that classic BMXs should be ridden.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be put on walls.
Okay. See, I really want one on the wall.
Well, that's exactly where mine is.
Right, okay.
And it just takes me back every time I look at it.
It's funny, because from being in the BMX industry, that they always have, and it's going to cost me some money at some point. So they always have the really noisy hubs that come from road bikes, and I will openly say that it comes from road bike technology, because it makes them move quicker through the skate parks. But because of that, I associate noisy hubs with good bikes. So someone comes past me with a noisier hub than me, I'm like, "Oh, bike's rubbish. I need to get a new hub." I just have this mental thing, like something, and when you get a peloton come past you and it sounds like a swarm of angry bees, and it's just like, I don't know, you get this inferiority complex, like I need a noisier hub. It's a bit of a strange thing.
I do kind of know what you mean, actually. Yeah, you kind of, especially when people have got disc wheels and things like that, you get the kind of slightly aggressive clicking coming past as you. Yeah. Because
there was, when we did the race the other week, there was a peloton that came back the other way of the pros that were leading the whole thing, and it literally sounded like a swarm of angry bees. It was, you could hear them from miles away, and just coming down the speed of them, was just absolutely crazy. Yeah. But I find it really exciting, and that side of things definitely. Am I ever going to be at pro level? Unlikely, but I don't think you necessarily need that, and I think that may be something that would put people off coming into the sport of, well, I'm not good enough. It doesn't make no difference where you are. It's that you versus you mentality. And I think that's what will make you grow as a person way more than, I think there's two sides of the sport, isn't there? They say, don't there, I don't know what the saying is, challengers and compete. There's a better saying than that. But yes, I'd like to beat my times and go on to increase my times and be better but I don't feel I'm against anybody else. I'm not going to Barcelona to race against anybody else. I'm going to race against myself. I want to do it in under 12 hours. That's my goal. So I'm going to race me. And I think that's a big thing, that you don't necessarily have to be an Olympian athlete or somebody coming into this with, I want to win. Because I know that would put some people off to say, well, I'm not really that competitive. I don't want to win. And I'm not saying I'm not competitive, because I can be a sod for it. But that isn't necessarily the thing. It's about taking your body to places that you can go. It's about improving yourself and you being better. And I think that there's an element of this sport that people would, or most people off the street would overlook that. They would just go, well, I'm just going there and racing. But certainly the longer stuff isn't always about, or certainly from my side, it isn't always about racing. It's about doing the best that you can.
Yeah. I think I don't know, would I say you're unusual from that perspective? I think you are a little bit.
Okay.
Because, my experience in the sport with age group athletes is that a lot of athletes spend a lot of time maybe not racing for themselves or training for themselves. Right. They're training because they want to show other people how good they are.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Kim Ingleby, who's a mind coach this morning, about the kind of what we call the Strava effect. Are you on Strava?
No.
Okay.
So there you go.
Do you know what it is?
I've used it, but I'm not on there.
Yeah. So
do you know why I'm not on there though? Because I go from my house quite a lot, and at the time I don't know if they've changed it, but I couldn't find a way when people see your routes that didn't basically put your house all over the internet. And
I think they've dealt with that now.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't like that idea.
They chop off the beginning and end of the workout. But what it does is it creates a community, an environment where everyone uploads their training and everyone can see what everyone else is doing. So it becomes, that your training's there for everyone to look at.
Yeah.
And it can become a stick to beat yourself with. So that can be a problem for some people.
Yeah.
So again, you're training for other people rather than training for yourself. But the kind of approach that you have is a much healthier.
There's always going to be somebody better, no matter what level you're at. That's true. There's always going to be somebody better, always going to be somebody faster. So you're just going to, if you're at a competitive level, then that's a little bit different. But if you're a weekend warrior, which most of us, I know you've got a lot of competitive guys within your group, but I just think that, yes, you've got to have the competition against other people, but the chances are there's always going to be somebody better, or even if you're the best in the world today, give it a year, 2 years, somebody's going to knock you off the top, and you have to accept that. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a different mentality that you need to be an elite athlete. I think that's a whole different one. You probably need that. But I know that if you start comparing yourself to other people all of the time, and I'm not saying I don't do this, because I do, but it only ever makes you miserable, never ever makes you happy. You never compare yourself to somebody and go, oh, I'm better than that person. You only compare yourself and say, what's missing? I'm not as quick, I'm not as good on, and you might be an amazing swimmer, but you're not quite as good on the bike. And all that really does is makes you miserable. And it's something that I'm trying to work on as a person, not necessarily through sport, but in all aspects of my life, where to stop comparing myself, because everybody's journey is different, everybody's DNA is different. There's freaks in this world, like Ross Edgley we mentioned earlier. That guy is a freak. I watched an interview with him the other day, and he said, yeah, so I get up in the morning and I do my swim session. I do an hour swimming, and then at lunchtime I go and do an hour's weights, and then about 4 o'clock I go and do another hour's weights, and then if I feel like it, I usually do another hour on the bike. And I'm like, if I do 2 session days, a few days back to back, I can't recover from it. Like, I literally, my body just kind of goes into everything sore. I'm tired. I feel a bit poorly, and I really struggle to recover. So how on earth somebody can train 4 days a week? Either he's taking drugs, which I could be, or not. I mean, it's not for me to say that. Or he's just a genetic freak, and we do have those. There are people that are just 1 in a million people that are just genetically freaky and can recover and are quicker than others. And you've only got to look at, and I think sometimes in certain, you've only got to look at some of the African runners. Like, they seem to be very, very, very talented. But that must be something in DNA, or the way that they're I've read various theories of the way that they're brought up in certain areas of the world, or what. But there's going to be certain genetic kind of differences, and when you get to that elite level, that's going to really show. I mean, absolutely, yeah. At Joe Blogg's level, it's not really going to show that much. Yeah. Training and how much you train is what's going to really show. Yeah. But when you start getting to elite level, I think a lot of it comes down to, are you genetically gifted enough to be that level? Well, I don't know if you'd agree with that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the main difference between It depends what kind of opportunities people are given throughout their lives, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, whether or not they end up on the path to being an elite or an Olympian or, you know, at the very top of the sport. You could potentially have, you know, a person who is not genetically gifted work very, very hard and get there, and you can have a person who is genetically gifted work hard and get there too. But I do wonder if the people at the actual pinnacle of the sport are the ones that do have these genetic differences. You know, you can train hard and you can achieve great things.
Yep.
But there's normally a step above that, isn't there?
Yeah.
For most people,
Definitely.
There's normally a step above that, and I think that's where you find these people sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's not to say for amateur athletes and for age groupers.
Definitely not. We're talking elite.
Yeah, we're
level,
talking the absolute, you know, top 10th of a percentage. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's going to be next after Barcelona? Then have you got your?
See, I'm really concerned about this.
Yeah.
Because I know when I did the marathon, even though I'd already entered the Ironman by this point, I felt terrible after. Like it was like I'd put all my focus into this, and by comparison, no training at all in comparison to what we're doing now. And I felt on a real downer for about a month, and I'm really concerned about. Because it's October, I'm going to finish the Ironman. I'm hopefully going to spend a week in Barcelona. I'm going to come back. It's going to be winter. Unless I line something else up pretty quickly or beforehand, I feel like I'm just going to get into quite a dark place. And I actually think that's something that, again, if you were new coming into the sport, you would never think that was a thing. To think that after a race, you're just only going to be on a high and you're going to tell everybody how you've just done this Ironman event. But it doesn't really go like that. It's you're like, and I know myself well enough to know the amount of training and how much of a big part of my life this has become now. For me to just stop in October isn't going to happen. And I now know that I'll never go back to just 4 or 5 days a week lifting weights. I'll always keep my hand in, but I'll never just do that now. But what next is a good question, because I don't know. I really don't know, mate. I find myself asking this question quite a lot. I've looked at various other things. I even looked at Marathon des Sables, to be honest. But the problem with Marathon des Sables, and I've not done it, I've just watched a few videos. It seems more of a mental thing, and mental thing's part of it for me. But you basically, a lot of it, or a lot of people seem to be, and I don't know this, as someone could correct me, but seems to be a lot of just walking and sticking on hour after hour after hour after hour, more than being a specific level of fitness, getting into a specific. I mean, I know of somebody that did it with just having a few part runs, and he basically just went and walked the whole thing, and just desert and desert and desert. I just don't know if it would be a bit boring. It just doesn't really. It doesn't seem that.
It's got to
exciting.
excite you to get you.
Yeah. Like I sponsored some guys who rode the Atlantic. I thought, that sounds cool. And I actually looked at it, and it's just, you do an hour and a half, they do an hour and a half, you do an hour, and I'm thinking, that must be mentally tiring, way more than physically tiring. Like mentally, you're just surrounded by complete blue, there's not seeing anything, just hour after hour after hour. Like, yes, there's an element I want to see how strong I am mentally, but equally so, it's about being fit. And I'm not saying you don't need to be fit to do that, but it's about that fitness level. So the problem is, I've said to my wife, no, I won't do another Ironman. Now, maybe I'll be a liar. She won't listen to this. So, because obviously in full distance, there's a huge amount of training, and it takes a huge amount part of your life. But equally so, I think once you've made that space in your life, it's kind of, as long as you keep that space in your life, it's there. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Putting it back on me, but I think. Well, first of all, I think the first thing you said is quite right in terms of after you've finished the Ironman, you know, you spend 12 months plus building up to something, and it's there, it's looming on the horizon, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you'll finish it, and you'll have this huge high, and you will have a down. And I see it time and time again with athletes, especially, you know, athletes that have, you know, fairly large events fairly frequently. It doesn't quite happen to the same extent, but for someone coming in from where you're coming and having this mammoth task to do, there'll be a hole after it.
Yeah.
There will be a hole after it. And the good thing about that is we know it's going to come, and we can talk about it as we are now, but maybe not so publicly next time, is we can prepare for that. I don't know what the answer is, but I think for sure we need to make sure that there is some kind of strategy in place for that, because you will feel flat.
Yeah.
And that can take away a little bit from the high place that you've just been to.
Definitely.
And the options are, you could do more races of the same. You could do, if you're into your cycling, you could do there's lots of kind of long distance cycling events that you can do. It's limitless, really.
Mm-hmm. Some of the events you see, now, once you get into it, there's some events that you read and they just sound unbelievably like exciting, and like there's so much variation that it's a whole different world once you get your head into it. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we'll have a conversation. Have a conversation about that. I mean, you don't kind of blog your journey or anything particularly, do you?
See, I said I was going to. It's funny, because I said my plan was always to do that, and I haven't really, and I'm regretting not. And there's still time to do that sort of. I always think I've got a similar camera, the Insta360 at home. It's not mine. My photographer's like, I don't use it, just have it. And every time I go out on my bike, I'm like, I should take that really. And I never do. Even I took it to the London 100, I still didn't put it on my bike. And I'm a bit useless with that, I have to admit. But I do think it would be a good thing to do, to look back on it. But also I think that, I quite disconnect myself from my work. But I own a fitness brand. And actually, what I've come to realise is, in my mind, we kind of around functional fitness, calisthenics, and I see them as two different types of people and two different types of things. And I thought, well, the people that buy wouldn't actually be that impressed by me doing an Ironman. But what I've come to realise is completely opposite to that. Like the fact that I practice what I preach. And when I tell these guys, oh yeah, I'm doing an Ironman, they're like, what? We could never do that. And that mentality, I think, potentially I should have or should be putting myself forward more, filming my training, showing what goes into it, showing what you have to do or what you need to do, and almost showing the downsides as well, like the times we are struggling mentally and you do need to get through it. So I haven't so far, and I do, if I'm honest, regret not so far, because it's been quite a big journey. My problem is I've got this thing, like, so when I did a lot of the bodybuilding, people would say, oh, do a photo shoot. And I'd always say, no, I'm not in good enough shape yet. But then you'd get in better shape 6 months down the line and you'd still say, no, I'm not in good enough shape yet. And it's a bit like that with me. With this, it's like, yeah, I don't really feel good enough. I'm not fast enough to blog. But actually, if I'd have started from the beginning, the process and the how much far I've come would actually be really interesting. Yeah. But in my mind, I'm always like, no, I'm not fast enough. I'll wait till I'm a bit faster. I'll wait till I'm running again. And that would be more interesting if I can then film the running. But I'm not running at the moment. And it's an excuse if we're being really honest. But I do wish I'd because it would have been a good year to have kind of documented it.
Well, it's never too late. It's never too late. And maybe you're actually kind of revealing your next goal as to set yourself a challenge.
True,
and to kind of document your way through it. But if people want to reach out to you and kind of pat you on the back and give you their best wishes and things, how would they get hold of you?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook. So my Instagram handle is Rich_Hawkins, and my Facebook page is Rich Hawkins Ecom, as there are a lot of e-commerce as well. So yeah, by all means, I love a chat, as you can probably tell. I love a chat. So yeah.
We did say this was going to be short, Rich, didn't we? But
I don't know how long it's been, to be honest. I have absolutely no idea.
It's an hour and 15 minutes, but that's all good.
And hopefully no one's bored of listening to us yet. or getting bored maybe now, but hopefully they haven't been so far. It's been interesting enough. Richard Hawkins, thank you very much for your time. Absolute pleasure. And I look forward to watching you cross the finish line at Barcelona. Cool. Lovely. Cheers, Dave. Well, I hope you found that interview with Rich Hawkins interesting. Certainly an interesting journey that he's embarked upon. He's making really good progress. So I'm sure from time to time we'll check in with Rich and give you updates as to how he's getting on. We'll put a link down to his Instagram page down below. So if you want to check him out, then obviously click that and take a look. So next week we have our coaches Q&A. And last time we did this, we got through about half a dozen questions, and we've got plenty more to go through. But we still want more questions. So if you've got things that you want us to spend some time talking about, then send your questions to podcast@do3.co.uk, and we'll go through those as soon as we possibly can. So that's it for today, really. All I'd like to say, really, just to finish off then, is if you could give us a follow, like, a share, all that kind of good stuff, regardless of where you're watching this. This is going out on video and on obviously the podcast channels.
then please do so. Doing that really helps us out. It kind of gets us up the rankings and allows more people to be able to find us and hopefully, like you have, enjoy the show. All right, so that's it for today, and we shall see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.